Hello, welcome to the W3C Community Group call for the 8th of December, 2021. The topics for this call are going to be quite diverse because they are a range of topics that have been raised over the last 2 or 3 months that are not related to the membership proposal, which has been absorbing most of our energy for the last little while. However, before we start digging into those, I'm just going to go around to people on the call in the order that they appear on my screen and ask them to introduce themselves just for the sake of the recording. So starting with you, Jason.
Hi all, Jason Sorrell, Partnership Engagement Manager at Playways. I'll hand over to Charlie.
Charlie Clark, Commercial Director at Playways.
I will pick on Ollie next.
Cool. Hi, Ollie from London Sport.
Thanks, Ollie. Rob.
I'm Rob for Net Services Cooperative.
Thank you, Rob. Chris Norfield.
Yeah, Chris, Head of Digital Behaviour Change at London Sport.
Thanks, Chris. Tom.
Hi, Tom Marley, co-founder Played.
Oh, really?
Thank you, Tom. Debbie.
Debbie Giordano, Everyone Active.
Thank you, Debbie. And finally, Nick.
Hello, Nick from IMIN.
Okay, thank you very much. I will now start sharing my screen. So you can see the presentation. So yes, as I said, it's a diverse range of topics to cover, some of which have been raised before. So it will be to some extent a status update. But the first range of issues to be discussed are all connected to social prescribing. This was to some extent a London sport concern. I think some of these points have been discussed earlier, but were left hanging a little bit. And there's really 3 that are most useful for the social prescribing use case. The first one is the difficulty in social prescribing of knowing when a record is actually still current. This has come out in multiple places for research. This concern about knowing that when you are looking at an opportunity that it actually is still available, that the data isn't stale, and so on and so forth. We did discuss this on a previous call, and the feeling there was that because in RPDE you already have a timestamp for publication, and because RPDE records are re-timestamped every time they're modified, that should just be parsed for the last updated date. However, it was also pointed out subsequently, I think on the thread, that actually that timestamp is not terribly useful for social prescribers. It isn't a very good indication of whether the record is up to date, partly because the systems might just keep publishing opportunities automatically, partly because trivial edits will still result in an updated timestamp, even if that doesn't reflect some kind of check that the data is in fact fresh. So just using RPDE was deemed unsatisfactory, leaving the question of how this should be communicated. And that was where the question stood, really. One possibility that occurred to me, and I'd be interested in others' opinions on the call, and in particular Ollie and Chris's, if you look at the root specification, actually, we have a construct which is verification record, which is actually 2 fields. It's date verified, which is an indication that somebody has actually gone and investigated the opportunity or the route, depending on context, and then verified by, indicating who's actually taking responsibility for having done that verification. It will be a little bit of a faff to populate those fields, but it does seem, to my mind, to indicate what social prescribing end users actually want. I think probably a date might not be rich enough actually for the kind of information that's needed there. So I'll throw that over to Ollie and Chris to see if this answers their needs better.
Yeah, sorry. I think so. From my understanding, actually open sessions is slightly fits outside this because we don't have kind of manual republishing every 2 weeks, where some big systems do. I'm thinking about this now. We're trying to get around this by changing the way we verify sessions. So that's from our side. But the work we did in our open data project, it's still, I think the end users, search probably still like to see more defined way of ensuring that the sessions have been verified. So yeah, whether that is the systems themselves adding in additional field for verified by with a date and a timestamp. I don't know the exact answer, but yeah, I think it was that, and just making it easier. I know that they can use a timestamp, but that requires you going through I guess taking that time, turning it into a timestamp. So it's an additional kind of action to do on their part. Whereas if it was simply a field, it would save them that time.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, the specific thing that came up from the social prescribers was they currently, whenever they find an activity, they have to then basically call up and they check, is this activity still going ahead? And that's the challenge we were trying to address, was just being able to give someone at least some indication that it was likely to be updated relatively recently. So yeah, is it right that the reason that the timestamp doesn't work is because some feeds republish even if that individual session hasn't been updated, so it kind of renders it useless?
That's certainly part of it, that when we saw this after the pandemic, that some feeds just kept on churning stuff out, even though, you know, the gyms were all closed. So yeah, it would look like it was recently generated, but that generation of the data didn't tell you anything about whether the data actually referred to anything. So I feel like, yeah, we've got a sort of fundamental difficulty here in that the hard part of the labor is actually doing the verification. Is that picking up of the phone?
Yeah, for me, it's almost, it's splitting it out. This was specifically looking at, can we give some indication to someone looking at this that it's been updated recently, so it's likely to still be running, versus, I would say, verification to me sounds quite a bit broader. And is another issue that again came up from social prescribing, again, which is that someone has looked at this and made a judgment on it or seen evidence, and I know that's been talked about before as well. So I would almost say it feels like distinct issues, and I think we were hoping that the timestamp would address the first small element of it. I'm not sure of the kind of verification route where you then need some authority verifying, like what discussions have been had so far around that, and whether that is something that's up for grabs, because I think obviously that implies quite a bit of resource manually, probably somewhere. The only other thing to throw into that is I know that places like Airbnb and eBay are now putting lots of manual resource into verification because they think it's really important. So we've always, well, my thoughts have always been, let's steer away from anything that has to have manual input. I wonder if actually, because they're talking about something as important as social prescribing and the verification for that, do we need to think about manual processes and verification in the future?
Is it worth looking at what Open Referral do? So Open Referral UK, there's I've just pulled up the spec, and there's they've gone down an assurance model where there's this idea, this concept of an assurer who guarantees data, and their data is published independently from a service directory, and then it's at the aggregator level that the two are combined, and you say that this is something that the service directory is asserting exists, and here is a trusted authority acting as an assurer that the data is correct, and when the two match up, you can say, yes, we know that this exists, assuming that you trust the assurer. And there's some work there. And it feels like if we're talking about social prescribing in the UK context, it doesn't make sense to do that too differently from the Open Referral world. Like, you're completely right that the time stamping part is the first bit of it, and there's a whole load of other stuff on top of that. But it makes sense, I think, to try and align with what's going on there and model that way around.
And is that assured on an organizational basis? Can you tell? I mean, that's why I understand Open Referral is more on an organization than a session.
It's so the fundamental object is a service in Open Referral. So that's it's somewhere in between the organization and the instance of a service.
Yeah.
So a service might be the I know antenatal physio that meets on a Thursday afternoon might be the service. And so OpenActive has a more granular instance of that. It's not just any Thursday afternoon, it's happening on this Thursday afternoon. But it's also it's more granular than just saying it's a service, it's an organization that provides the service that we assure.
That's really nice, actually, because there's I think there was a proposal ages ago for assurance around social prescribing. Tim may remember it. There was a whole model to link in with other organizations that would kind of assure, and it was at a session series level or an organizer level. I can't remember, but either way, we can do session series level, which is exactly what Open Referral do. And if Open Referral already have assurers, that's an interesting one. So if assurers exist in the Open Referral world for these prescribing services, because I think the issue we had last time we did all this was we don't have any assurers here. MCR was going to be an assurer. They realized the resources might be too much, and then we're not sure if they are going to be now. I think there was at one point in time, the BBC or Sport England were also acting as assurers, but it's the resource that's always been the issue. So I guess that might be an interesting one. Who is it in social prescribing? Who are these assuring organizations, and can they extend their reach into physical activity? Maybe that solves our issue.
It's also a possible approach to safeguarding as well. In fact, it's almost that this kind of assurance is a limited case of safeguarding.
Tim, are you mind reading? Because me and Charlie have had a similar conversation. Really, I think if we went for a crowdsourcing scenario, it helps clean data by basis of people actually giving people a score on the quality of service they received by that provider. So it answers safeguarding. It could answer the social prescribing with feedback through that, the data quality.
Okay, so I guess the action is on me, I guess, to take a look at the Open Referral approach in greater detail and see how applicable that is across the physical activity domain. With regard to the desire for simply a sort of data freshness measure, I can't really think of any way to hack it. I'm in my head, I'm kind of playing around with ideas about, our particular significant fields, the ones that would be of interest and so on, but I just don't think there's any way to get around that automated data publication trap, unfortunately.
There's a wider issue here around, I think I posted on the GitHub issue there, a comment around this already, but there's a wider issue around the modeling for any data published with a updated date on it. And there's a reason why schema.org doesn't generally have this kind of thing published alongside the data, just because it's usually just a really poor indication about the accuracy. Just because someone's updated it doesn't mean, I think as Tim's saying, like if someone says, yes, I've looked at this, does that mean they've looked at one session? Have they looked at all their sessions? Have they checked every single one of them? Are they just saying that without going into detail? If they're ill, are they going to update it? Possibly not. And obviously with Google, there's people fake these things for other reasons as well, which doesn't help. So I do. Currently, my view on the updated date is it's just a can of worms that doesn't really ultimately solve any problems, because it doesn't have the. It's not actually answering the question that we want to know the answer to, which is this session currently happening, because it doesn't quite do that.
Yeah, so unfortunately, I don't think there is a. Yeah, my next point was going to be to turn to you, Nick, and say, is there any sort of trace you can get out of particular configurations of the data that would indicate that an update or publication event was more significant than another? But yeah, it feels like it's just trying to overload one data point that doesn't really answer the case. Okay, so yeah, I guess it's really about third-party authorization or third-party publication, making assertions. So then that's
So
infrastructural.
Open Referral does have this concept of kind of trusted publishers almost, where publishers can self-assure, and if they are suitably trusted, and that trust, of course, can be revoked at any point. Suitably trusted, then they don't need to go through an additional assurance step. The example in the documentation I just gave was Age UK, massive, well-trusted charity. So a way of saying, and it would have to be done by the data consumers, but say, I trust this publisher to always update their sessions, even if they are cancelled at the last minute, or if there's a global pandemic or whatever, then they can self-assure. Otherwise, yes, you do need some kind of third-party assurance or alternative default behavior, depending on, and that might vary from aggregator to aggregator. If you're producing a fairly general purpose service guide, as Open Referral often replaces, then maybe you don't care about that. If you're wanting to expose a book now button, you probably do care about that. And so that behavior is going to change. But I guess crucially, what's envisaged by Open Referral is two independent data sources being interpreted by individual aggregators or individual consumers to serve those consumers' ends.
Right, which is a bit rough on London Sport, I suppose, because actually the data producers are quite a long tail. So I suppose it's difficult to generalize about them. Although in London Sport, do you have, on open sessions, do you have to actually click an update button every couple of weeks? Is that how it works? That you do have to verify your continuing participation?
Yeah, so we are actually making changes in line with this came from JDEMD, who are looking at how you verify as on an organisation basis rather than a session basis. So we are looking at ensuring all organisations update within every 60 days. When we say update, it's just a login essentially. So again, it's as long as they've logged in, we will assume they have looked at their sessions. We can't still verify they've actually gone in and changed every field, but we'll assume.
Right. Okay.
If they don't,
again, that makes sense because
those sessions are taken out of the feed.
Right.
So it's kind of like if you don't take a positive action, then they go back to draft rather than being published.
Right. Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
And actually, that's a good point from the I can talk from Iman's perspective. At the moment, we do have that kind of rough idea about some feeds are more reliable than others. I think the pandemic showed that even that isn't always the case. But certainly those feeds that are connected to a booking system where bookings are taking place and transacting, such as GLL, are very reliable because obviously they also connect to the website of the provider. Those things, they really help. So at the moment, we certainly look at each feed case by case and make a decision about whether we think it's what level of reliability and quality we think it has, based on a number of factors. And obviously anything that's bookable, we take as, well, that's definitely right. So it's the other feeds, and obviously open sessions won't be bookable, so it will remain in that in between.
Okay, well, let's move on from there then. I think, and take a look at the open referral model more generally. The second point is intensity level. Now, this has come up a couple of times, and I think it's just hard to move forward. I think because actually difficulty level is controversial and has gone through several iterations, and then actually usefully differentiating that from intensity level has proven to be a minefield, because views on difficulty level have ranged from we shouldn't indicate it at all to we need to have a numeric scale to various proposals that are really about the intended audience of an activity. And then intensity level, even though natural language nicely captures the difference between difficulty and intensity, intensity seems to open up the same kind of range of issues, really, that difficulty does. And so they start overlapping, and then there's a hard time defining even internally what intensity is supposed to convey. So I think the question is really who we would have to consult to get a meaningful sense of intensity level. Because if this is a social prescribing use case, I guess the question is, what do social prescribers want to see conveyed there, and what is the language that they use to communicate that? So I think it's about who we would talk to, really.
Yeah, again, from the research that we did, it was they're having a conversation to understand, is this session going to be right for the person sitting in front of me, and are they going to feel competent and able to do it? And I guess it's just really hard to do that from the criteria we've got at the moment. We're certainly happy to kind of support any work on this, to make some contact with organizations who do this and explore it.
Okay, let's maybe do a deep dive there. And yeah, I think that's where difficulty has kept on foundering, or level, I guess, as it got called, in that there's it's difficult to make this distinction between something that's suitable for somebody with no experience, something that's suitable for somebody who not only has no experience, but is physically unfit. Somebody that has got some experience but hasn't done it, it gets very, very fine grained. And it could be that once you move into a slightly more medical kind of framing of it, it becomes a bit easier. But yeah, we don't have that expertise. So I guess the action there is I'll liaise with Ollie and Chris about talking to people more directly and bringing them maybe onto another call.
Yeah, and so just to add to my colleague Rob sent me an email the other day that the Professional Regulation Standard Body are working with NHS England to deliver a social prescribing standard. So if they're working on that standard, I guess it might be a case of just holding on, seeing what that standard looks like, and then working backwards from that.
I think we probably want to get involved maybe more directly at this point, rather than wait for the standard to descend. Just because, yeah, we presumably want to be compatible with them, and then open referral is somewhat in the mix as well. So it's hazy lines, but it sounds like a conversation that would be worth having, and make sure we're aligned at the very least.
So is that standard separate from Open Referral UK? Because last I heard that was a standard that was moving towards adoption by the DSA for social prescribing use cases. I feel that's if there's a third standard in the mix, that's worth us noting.
So yeah, I'm just adding it into the chat. Yeah, I think.
Okay, so
great. Someone should definitely tell these guys about Open Referral.
Yeah. Yes, and definitely wanted to bring to the attention of the Data Standards Authority, indeed, since they are clearly proceeding and I think would be recommending Open Referral UK to the NHS. So yeah, there's some conversations that definitely need to be had around that. Okay, interesting. I feel like I'll be returning to that tab shortly after the call, but so people to talk to for a variety of reasons. And then the final bullet point on that slide is social prescribing ready Boolean, sort of I can prescribe people to this. Now, if I understood the summary on the GitHub issue, this is a kind of notion of an organization indicating that they've got some kind of special provision in place to welcome people and support people. when they show up for their prescribed activity. Is that understanding correct? London Sport peeps?
Yeah, so yeah, that's right. So it could be they have a warm reception meet. They have specific actions they kind of do once the person arrives. There's a number of different things.
I think it also crosses over into a prescription being different to a signposting. So often when we talked about social prescription, actually we're signposting people to sessions, whereas prescribing someone to attend an activity often involves some sort of transaction with the person running it. So sharing information, either booking someone on or having some understanding of what that instructor is ready to accept someone and that they've got the right qualifications, but then also maybe feeding something back. So I mean, maybe that goes across into some sort of booking element as well.
I suppose the question that came to mind with that was, is a Boolean enough there, or do we need to have actually more information captured about, what specifically that sort of support consists of? Because I can imagine a link worker, they must see people with very different needs, I assume, that, sometimes they'll have people who are really socially isolated, but are otherwise fit and well. And a sort of fairly minimal amount of support might be sufficient for them, whereas other people who've got maybe, comorbidities would need more extensive support, and the link worker would therefore want to see more information than simply a sort of tick box saying, yes, there's some unspecified kind of support available. Is your sense that actually that kind of tick box would be sufficient in itself, or is there more that needs to be captured to be useful?
I got the feeling that a tick box with a free text box below it would start to address it.
Mm-hmm.
Whilst obviously, as we improve the accessibility and learn more about what would be included in there, that could then be padded out with more. As the accessibility proposal is still being kind of created, a Boolean with a text box suffice.
Yeah, I suppose there's a couple of different ways that this cat could be skinned, because there is an attribute in the opportunity model, which I'm now forgetting, but that is about what the accessibility provision in place is. And I suppose the Boolean could be populated by, is that attribute populated at all? If so, here's the text box. The accessibility proposal has got a more structured way of doing that and encourages the capturing of more fine-grained information. I think maybe it would be worth folding that into the intensity level conversation. If we're having discussions with social prescribing end users and vendors, maybe this would be something to talk to them about as well. What exactly would be envisaged and what they'd be prepared to collect, actually.
That's a really interesting one, actually, because is it that the only reason we care about intensity level is because we're looking for social prescribing ready stuff, or is it because we want to prescribe people to medium intensity as well? Because if it's only people who are beginners that we're looking for, then actually one free text box where the organizer can just write what they, how they're meeting the needs of the social prescribing audience. Maybe the text box's audience is actually the social prescriber themselves rather than the end user, and then that would just be a hidden field almost from everyone else's perspective, but surfaced in social prescribing applications. And if it was described as such, then maybe that one free text box would solve the Boolean, and it would solve the intensity problem. And then you may only surface opportunities in the social prescribing use case that had something in that text box that the prescriber could read.
Yeah, so there's a social prescribing description or something like that.
Yeah, and that actually could help the verification issue as well, because if someone knows that their data, that someone using that social prescribing description or social prescribing information, or however we describe it, then it might be that it could say as part of that, by filling out this box, you realize that this data we put in front of health workers, blah blah blah, and therefore this data, you know, please tick this box to confirm you will keep this data up to date, given that people will be sent your way or something. So the whole exchange between the organizer and the prescriber becomes a lot more explicit. There's a real like sense of opting in. I'm not just publishing my stuff for general consumption, but I am publishing my stuff for social prescribing consumption, and therefore I need to be conscious of that in the way I run my session. It needs to be a certain level of intensity, and it needs to be up to date data because it will be put in front of people.
Yeah, that's nice. And then there's an opportunity in the guidance really to say, here's the kind of what best practice would look like for information that would be included, but it's not over prescriptive that way, so to speak, because it does seem to be quite a nuanced world.
Is there ever a circumstance where social prescribing would happen to or between a social prescribing relationship would exist between two organizations where there isn't a pre-agreed relationship, at least to some degree, possibly not a commercial one, but I think even when referring to sort of voluntary sector services, is the expectation that there's at least been a pre-agreed relationship or setup of saying, like, are you happy to receive prescriptions, or is the expectation that you can, yeah, it feels more like signposting if there isn't.
Yeah, I think what we'd found from the research that we did was that the current practice is almost always a prescriber or a development worker within that service has gone out and seen and engaged with the provider and got some sort of relationship. The only caveat to that might be something like walking groups. They came up a lot, that we knew walking groups happening in the borough. I think they were almost always seen as quite an easy thing to prescribe people to without perhaps having a formal relationship. But I think, again, one of the things we were trying to address was, is that a scalable solution in the future? Is there a way that we can help services make those connections without having to have literally people going around meeting the organizations? I think that one of the findings that came back was, I don't think it's ever going to be just done digitally. There's always going to be a need for development work to make those partnerships, but can we digitally through this support that, facilitate it, make it easier, would be of interest. Again, I'd certainly be keen, Tim, Nick, if you could put down what you said in a way that kind of sets out what that possible solution could be, then that would be a good starting point for us to be able to go back to some contacts and just explore, would this be useful? How might they use that kind of approach?
Yeah, I start wondering about, again, the involvement of third parties as well. I think it is useful to have the activity provider able to state how they're making provision, but it's also quite useful to have third parties able to state actually that, you know, they verified this, or that this is a particular shortcoming that's been identified, and so on and so forth. So it could be that we move outside the opportunity specification for some aspects of this as well. Okay.
So I'm just thinking on this about the intensity of the thing. I'd be amazed if there isn't an existing vocabulary somewhere in NHS world that describes not necessarily intensity or difficulty, but some measure of the characteristics of the activity such that it's suitable for, or who it might be suitable for. And that, I think, again, the open referral is highly taxonomy driven, because the NHS is. And I wonder if there's something, yeah, I'd be amazed if there wasn't something that could be used there, and that kind of then gives an implicit signal that it has these characteristics, and therefore somebody has thought about whether it is suitable to be referred to. Well, I mean, yeah, like as a stopgap or an immediate thing, free text, absolutely. Like I'm not objecting to that at all. I'm not in a position to, but yeah, I'd be amazed if there wasn't something already that would allow that kind of slightly richer description, and that might be the language that social prescribers are talking anyway. And if there's not already, then it wouldn't surprise me if it wasn't something like, if not a formal taxonomy, then certainly an agreed set of language or a sort of vocabulary that was emerging from practice.
Thank you, Rob. Yeah, I did some preliminary investigations there, and all I worked out was that the physiotherapists didn't have a vocabulary like that, but that was as far as I got. Charlie, you've raised your hand.
Yeah, my only comment for what it's worth would be, I'd be concerned understanding the potential appropriateness of that Boolean being very explicit as an opt-in, I agree with that mantra in its theory. I imagine there's a lot of community providers, I would estimate in the majority rather than minority, who might not understand what they would be opting into there because of the disconnect between the social prescribing landscape and them as traditional sport and activity providers. But that doesn't mean they're unsuitable. They just won't know, and so they won't choose to opt in. The risk there being that if there's an existing referral service, I don't know, has a network of 50 engaged providers, what we might do is put a lot of work and effort around creating a network of 50 identified providers that they already work with, and they haven't actually got any new data. We're not exposing new opportunities to that audience at all. We're just working with the people we're already working with because they know how it works, if that makes sense. So my comment, if it helps in the solution, would be if we're going to have that Boolean, it maybe needs some kind of subcategories. Say I already work in this space, or I have this service, or I'm signed up to anything that might be able to categorize them that will make sense on the third party side, on the referrer side, that an activity provider can go, yes, this is, I provide these services, or I have these types of qualifications. Otherwise, I just think that could be something that only those who know opt into, and otherwise nobody else does, and we don't actually solve anything.
Right. So, sorry. So is the point that really there has to be an explicit guidance and engagement piece surrounding that kind of change?
I think potentially, I wouldn't want to. I certainly think for a lot of our customers, and that's one audience, but I'm not sure they would know. I think they'll sit quite traditionally outside of the social prescribing landscape, and they just won't know whether they're fit to opt in, especially the more explicit that's made. But actually, they might be the sort of audience that the social prescribing network is looking to be able to refer to. I watched a BBC News story the last few days that was someone leaving prison who's been referred to a rowing club in London, but that rowing club in London probably may not be the sort of traditional club that would know to be able to tick that box. It might just be that they happen to have a person or legacy involved in the social prescribing initiative. So I just think we need to be careful with isolating providers who may well already be suitable, but it's almost too explicit.
Okay. Sorry, somebody got referred into rowing. That's wow, I would hesitate to engage in that, but okay. Okay, yeah, yes, noted. And I think that's kind of core to what makes OpenActive different from Open Referral in the social prescribing area anyway. That, yeah, there's no point OpenActive addressing the same group of people that Open Referral is catering for. So yeah, I would see engagement as central to any reason for OpenActive to be engaged in this area. Moving on to some concerns raised. Sorry, are there any further points to make with social prescribing? I think most of the actions are talk some more about it with people closer to the social prescribing world. Okay, I'll move on to a couple of concerns that have been raised by Playways, in fact. The first is some kind of the possibility of a controlled vocabulary for, I think, organization types. The issue being, or rather the use case being, if you want to create an activity finder that can filter by, say, sport, whether something is a sports club or a leisure club, or whether in fact it's a park or something like that, it's not really possible to do that right now up front. So how that would be indicated in the data is an open question. But I imagine Playways and Iman will both have a perspective on that that's well informed. So jump in, Charlie, Jason, Nick.
Could you just open up that issue, Tim? Because I've done a little bit of pre-work here that might.
Okay. Okay, so we've got an MCR sort of extension. And is this, so this is implemented already, really?
Save us some time.
Okay.
And then my internet's totally dropped, apologies.
So my understanding, if it helps, sort of kind of think, I had a good read of Nick's comments before, Nick, really helpful, thank you, before we came on. I think my understanding of where we are is I'm going to treat treat it for language, for taxonomy purposes, what's there for MCR, perhaps a little bit of a beta property or an MCR property. In fact, it's sort of well labeled MCR, so I assume that's fair. Where you can see it's got education campus, leisure centre, open space park. So it's catering for a small number of use cases of facility type. Tim, I think you made reference higher up to in the proposal, last statement of the proposal of the schema additional type might be a candidate here. I think what we're spotting is there is a real ambition for people to search by location. Tom, by the way, I think you're going to be interested in this from a catering better for sports clubs generally, as one that we've touched on several times before. So we can see a data set coming from Lincolnshire, but we can see other data sets in other county partnerships, which represent their facility data across community centres, public village halls, public venues, schools, all of those being places that you will find active opportunities, not the opportunities themselves. We've actually created for our own use at the moment a list. It's 20 or so long, but it's going to get longer, no doubt. It probably represents what will future-wise become or need to become, I'm going to make a gross assumption, something akin to the activity list and the accessibility list, a tiered set, because you're going to get AstroTurf, and that AstroTurf is going to have 5 different things that can happen on that AstroTurf, and you can see how quickly it's going to scale. So the controlled vocabulary needed, but yeah, this ability to be able to identify an organizational facility by its type so that you can search by it.
Okay, so Nick's anticipated that, which is helpful. I'm terrified by the fact that you mentioned AstroTurf, because the whole pitch material facility type discussion is also gnarly, and the answer to that was also another SCOS controlled vocabulary. So we're very fertile in proposals for SCOS controlled vocabularies. That said, they're a good answer for a lot of reasons. I think the next step there then is it's been a long-standing action on me to have the controlled vocabulary for facility type, pitch, surface, etc. created. It sounds like you've already got one for facility type in a broad sense that you're using at Playways.
Are we saying, sorry, just to clarify that one, are we saying facility type, or are we saying place type? Because I think that they might be 2 different things.
We actually treat them, if it's helpful, as one at Playways rather than 2.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, we've got.
Yeah, that's a challenge, because so that's the reason that is a complicated thing from a modeling perspective, is because obviously they are the facility type. So I don't know if you've seen in that issue as well. I did some a little bit of work on that recently, the facility type stuff, and added to that issue. That one is, there's already a facility, pretty well defined list of facility types, which obviously Sport England interactive places deal with. And most of those are kind of about the facility itself, whereas these are more kind of places, as in what the address represents. I suppose there's some overlap, I suppose, like an ice rink, where the place is an ice rink and the facility type's an ice rink. But
just to jump in there, sorry Nick, but from our perspective, we talk about places as venues, and then facilities and sessions take place at those venues. Obviously, understanding types of venues is important for the use case, but it does get a bit tricky, because you've got, like, what is a club? Is a club an actual physical building, or is it a group of members, or like they can be interchangeable. And I feel like it'll be useful for the same sort of thing across the board, just some controlled vocabulary, because I don't think it exists within the sector very well, and just could be a good opportunity for OpenActive to add value and for us to discuss. But yeah, I always find it challenging, like, what's the plural of facilities, sessions, courses? Like, is that activities or blah, blah, blah? So yeah, it's difficult. I don't want to throw more work down the barrel, but I just think it's worth discussion.
I think we've got that work here, and like, I sort of like this because it's a mess, but it's a very like standards kind of mess. Like, this is the kind of mess that standards sort of have to sort out fairly routinely. So I think the action is for me to share the facility type taxonomy that's been floating around since June, unless Nick has already added to that, and collate that with the vocabulary that Playways has been developing more or less independently. So if I can get Charlie and Jason to share that vocabulary, I think in a different repo, I'll send you the link, or I'll make the link known on the W3C mailing list. And we can at least start looking at those vocabularies and start teasing apart where they're different and where they're overlapping. And we can get to that point. I'd suggested very hopefully additional type as a kind of like, how about if we had 12 strings that would cover everything? But that's clearly not going to be a simple solution that actually works. So yeah, let's go full bore on this.
We've very much gone with an informal approach anyway, and with the knowledge that the standards probably would come and sort of overtake. So yeah, we're not precious about our list. We just needed to use it for solution purposes.
Okay, great.
I raised the kind of data quality concern here in regards to potentially duplication of venues. If there, several people are using different systems and they're creating that venue, it's creating duplicates of that venue. Is there a way in which that could be cleansed to look cleaner somehow?
Yeah, this is an aggregation problem. This is something that's very common in the open data world. So we end up with lots and lots of references to a single entity, and you end up with apparent duplication, or you get slight near duplication, which is even more painful. Step one would be deciding on how to refer to entities, or what kind of identifier to use to refer to place entities so that they could usefully be compared. Nick, do you have any thoughts here? Solve the open data disambiguation problem, Nick.
I think it's, here he is.
Oh, hello. I'm sorry, I missed that. What did you ask the question again?
Sorry, so Jason's raised the point of the difficulty of data quality, data duplication when you've got lots of references to a single place or a single venue, but you've got multiple representations of it. How do you actually disambiguate those?
Sure. Okay. Yeah. So I'm not sure if this is a proposal. I can't remember whether we've added this as a proposal, if it's just something in the I'm in platform that does its thing. Just because there was already so much going on that we didn't want to add any more to the stuff. But basically the way that I'm in does this, and possibly could be ecosystem wide, is it labels providers of data as authoritative. And so GLL would be a good example, or EverActive would be a good example of an authoritative data source from a places perspective. And so if a place is added to an authoritative source, that place becomes the place that is then findable and used, and where duplicates are identified, that place is used as the one that is the source of truth. And generally, those places will have a lot more. So EverActive's data has got a lot of content in the place, images, opening times, all sorts, for example, and GLL's shortly will have too. And so that works in terms of, it doesn't solve, so there isn't at ID. The ID can be used for disambiguation from a kind of within data sets, but there isn't a kind of approach that we've got right now that within the platform that links across data sets from those authoritative sources, which is the next step. And if we were going to do something like that, that's actually quite a big undertaking, because we're talking about OpenActive wide lookup across all sources to present back. So that's a question mark for me on that one. But I think what's interesting to think about is, if you look at the name and the geo, as in the lat long, you can get quite a long way from those two bits of data in terms of looking at duplicates, because the lat long is quite specific. And so even if you've got two organizations you'd have to have two organizations in the same place, or one above each other on different floors, and having the same name in order to get that match wrong. So it might be, that's what we do, and that's enough, it seems, for now. So it might be that's enough for now in terms of that matching. Whether we want to standardize is authoritative or something like that more generally. At the moment, IMIN makes that decision case by case based on the feeds, as I think we mentioned around the quality before in terms of how up to date. But that could easily be done in the data itself, and people could self-proclaim that they are authoritative. That's helpful.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, that would be all that could be standardized. I guess the rest you can give guidance about heuristics, I suppose, but standardized, that would be difficult.
Yeah, and sorry, I was going to say that the other thing to mention, unless this is on a different slide, is there's also a need that has been identified recently. I'm not sure if Charlie was going to bring this up because I know Playways had looked at this. A places feed. And that is they are authoritative because that's where someone is literally adding places that they own themselves to a feed, and those places are then available. That's something that we worked with MCR on. I mean, the standards already support a places feeds. We haven't got any restriction to prevent those things from working together. It's just that there's no guidance around it and it's not being commonly adopted. So a places feed, and so therefore I don't think the validator will the test suite certainly won't fully support it, but the standards, if the tooling doesn't, the standards still kind of broadly do. And so whether we have places feeds as kind of something that we add to the tooling to kind of formalize that idea is another consideration. I don't know if Charlie would want to jump in on reasons why that might be helpful.
Yeah, I mean, context of this is we model exactly the same way Tom mentioned. He does modeling on his side. We have a venue that can be attributed to an activity opportunity. We don't do facilities, but facilities would be the same model. So a user on our system can add a venue. Now, what we've done is bring into a venue not just the location, image, name information, but all place related information, websites, operator names, contact details, website information, amenities, etc. And we're passing that out in our facility use feed. That then is picked up by IMIN, so it can be passed back as places data. And I believe there's some work there's some work already happening that converts facility use data into IMIN's places feed back to us. It's being used so that we can do I'm looking for leisure centres and then find the activities and facilities at leisure centres. So we're acting as a publisher for places. I think the only other system doing that today is Kinetic Insight for MCR Active. So yeah, we are sort of inadvertently publishing places and encouraging our clients to publish places, but under no direct standards. I don't believe some of it, I'm sure, relates to elements of the standard.
Yeah, the way Charlie you're doing it right now is a massive hack, to be fair, for good reasons of getting it over the line, but that is misusing a facility use feed to represent places by duplicating the name of the place into the facility use. And so if that was going to be used by any other data user, that would be obviously a bit confusing, because where you're expected to see a squash court, you actually see a leisure centre.
Okay, I think we need to pick this up in a whole other half call anyway. A lot of this is about implementation as well, so we can maybe have some out of band conversations about what kinds of heuristics and approaches are working right now. I'm mindful that we started the call with Tom saying the one thing he was really interested in was block booking, and we now have we have 2 minutes. But I was actually going to sort of defer this one in a sense, because I've looked at the issue and it raised 2 questions for me. One of them was, do we need this to be in the booking spec at all? In fact, do we need to support this, or is this the kind of thing that is just easily handled out of band over the phone, which seems to be how it happens right now? And then the second question was, if it is desirable to do this, who do we actually need to talk to? There's some schools that are routinely sort of block booking organizations and so on. Because we've actually got in issue 229, we've got a nice technical proposal. So it's really about who needs to review that and who needs to parse it out for this to be a solution. So with regard to the first question, I'm guessing Tom, Charlie, possibly London Sport, you'll have views on this. What's your take?
I can go quickly to say that over August, September, October, and released in November, we released block bookings for activities, and we didn't look at their standards at all. We've just done it our own way.
All right. Okay. So there was a market demand there, is what you're saying.
We're doing it for holiday activity and food programs, so children and parents can block book activities.
Okay.
And Charlie, do you mean by block book within regards to activities like check out multiple things at the same time? Is it like a shopping cart functionality?
Yeah, it doesn't
Yeah.
present as a shopping cart, but yes, they are checking out multiple things at the same time.
Cool.
And those multiple things are like every Tuesday for the next 6 months, that kind of class of walk.
It's really flexible, but yeah, it can be you need book Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday this week, or every Tuesday for the next 6 weeks, aka like a course of sessions that you have to do every one, and you're booking onto the end to end. You can do it on all sorts of schedule, all the schedules you might think, daily, weekly, monthly, etc., and choose how it operates.
Yeah, I think there's a terminology thing here, isn't there? Because that to me would Everyone Active would be a course if you're booking into something that occurs for more than one instance. And when you refer to block bookings, and when I initially saw this, block bookings to me is a club hire or a school hiring a space and at the same time each week, and that's kind of a different approach to a customer reserving that space and paying for it. Those block bookers would normally be invoiced or pay by backs, or those sorts of approaches. That's the terminology I would use for block bookings in the leisure world.
Yeah, I tend to agree with my perception of block bookings is around facilities, but I understand the similarity in session block bookings. But yeah, I think there's a little bit of difficulty defining that as a course, because courses tend to be fixed over a certain period of time and aren't like ongoing per se. So that might just be the nuance that needs to be picked up with how things are described. In regards to the first question that you mentioned about whether we can kind of handle it outside of the booking spec and it be done manually, we want to be able to facilitate it all online and work we're doing anyway. So yeah, it wouldn't be passed off. It would all be user-driven block booking. So it's fairly complex, but we have a quite near-term requirement for it. So we'll be building it from our end and can share anything as that progresses. But I guess it's whether there's a short-term handoff between someone going via an activity finder, etc., finding a spot and then being taken into a user flow. I think when we're getting into these levels of user journeys where it isn't just as easy as clicking a button and making a payment, there is some extra stuff, then it might be more of a kind of Skyscanner pass off type experience, which would make it simpler from my perspective, and yeah, just be worth exploring.
Okay, so this is worth picking up on then, is the consensus. We're now a couple of minutes, 3 minutes over time. So I will let everyone go. Block booking, I think we just have to address in a subsequent call. And maybe we can communicate offline about who else should be on that call come the time. Quickly, however,
sorry.
Oh yeah.
Sorry, Tim. Yeah, I'm keen to accelerate this as much as possible. So I'll drop you a message and we can get the right people on a call as soon as we can. Then sure. I'm keen to push forward outside of this cycle.
Okay, sounds good. Any other business before we leave?
Outside of this cycle.
Okay, my apologies for having taken up a little bit more of your calendars than should have been the case. I'll look forward to seeing some of you tomorrow in the technical working group. And there were a lot of actions from this call, which I'll attempt to get written up by the end of the week, as this was a busy one.
Oh, sorry, Tim. Just for the sake of the log on the call, there's a proposal in the open booking spec for 223, which is the minimum age of a customer, and I think that might have actually, from a call with everyone active earlier, be an issue that we need to resolve sooner rather than later. I'm just surfacing it to this group because obviously we can pick it up tomorrow in the technical call, but if anyone's interested, 223 minimum age of the customer is a problem for anyone that's taking booking for minors, basically. because the minimum age of the customer making a booking is a problem that we haven't really tackled yet.
Okay, thank you, Nick. Yeah, that's quite pertinent to the other conversations ongoing. Sorry, I'm aware of everyone's time. So thank you very much, Nick. And yeah, well, let's coordinate on Slack in the first instance regarding block bookings. I'll make sure everyone is invited to any channels that are relevant. Okay, thank you very much all.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
See you later.